Ian, I really want to thank you for everything that you've done for Simone and I. When we first started working together, you've really just completely changed our lives. You know, I needed a lot of help with my business. I thought that I had a great business when I met you. You wake up one day and you've got anxiety running through your skin and your body's telling you that something's not right. And I knew that there were things that weren't right at work that I needed help on. And I had to humble myself and seek help, and I did. And I can't thank you enough for the help that you've given us. What are you, a business advisor or a business coach?
Well, I'll answer that question in a second. But first of all, many thanks for that, Trav. It's been my absolute pleasure working with both you and Simone. It really has. I've loved every minute of it. And there's a lot of things you do right in the business. I love your work ethic. I love the way you work with your staff. I love your focus on your clients. So there's a huge amount of really important ingredients that you've got there. And that's something we can work with. And the other thing you mentioned was humbling yourself and being open to that input. Not every business owner is, but the more you can accept that there's other ideas and views out there and be open to hearing those, the more successful your business is going to be. In terms of your question, am I a business advisor or a coach? I'd like to think I do a bit of both. And they are quite different disciplines. So a business advisor really provides the benefit of their experience. They provide tools, techniques, templates, knowledge, advice, guidance, and it's very much about imparting things that I have to help your business, and I love doing that. I absolutely, and especially love the way you've taken that stuff and then adapted it and made it your own. So I'm seeing that stuff in action, and it's not one size fits all. It's being able to select the things that work for your business and implement them in the most effective way. So I've loved seeing you do that. Thank you for that. In terms of the coach, that actually is quite a different discipline, and I became an accredited coach to find out how do I do that stuff properly. And in contrast to the business advisor, a business coach, you have to believe that you as the client have the answers. The job as the coach is to ask sensible questions and create a creative process whereby you come to the answers yourself, hopefully by me asking you some sensible questions. So that's kind of the distinction. You are, as a coach, you are not required or supposed to provide advice, but as a business advisor you very much are.
Yeah, well, I can honestly say that sometimes I don't like the coaching so much because sometimes I just want to know what the friggin' answer is. Remember the time you were trying to just pry out of me the answer to something, and I just said, for crying out loud, will you please just tell me? That's what I'm paying you for. I need some advice. But
and that's the point. It's about getting the client the result that they need. Sometimes a coaching approach is appropriate, and sometimes a advisory approach is appropriate. And in that case, and I remember that case really well, and in fact I was telling somebody about it just this morning, you've got to pick the right one, and you haven't got time to go through a process whereby if it's just some relatively straightforward advice, take the path of least resistance, help with that, and then there's going to be opportunities to get more into a coaching mode where there's perhaps higher level issues that need to be addressed.
Yeah, that's right. This book that you wrote, Ian, when I had it here and I sat over in that chair over there and I was reading it, I was so excited. I just kept telling Simone, like, this is my brain in here. Like, I swear to God, my whole entire brain's in here because we've worked for many years together.
Yes.
You know, looking back at all that we've achieved, and look, you know better than me that I haven't achieved the goals that I want to achieve just yet, and we've still got more work to do, but I can see that, like, the vision is really clear, all the goals are set. I know where I'm heading. I know where I'm taking this company, and I know what I want to get out of this company. My question to you is, what is the biggest problem that you face with people? What are they needing the most?
I think actually probably one of the most common things that comes up, and it's usually for a variety of different reasons, is probably lack of time. That's the most prevalent issue that business owners have, and the reason for that is there's probably nobody more passionate about the business than the business owner themselves, and because of that they're keen to make sure it works as well as possible in all different facets of the business. And the reality is you can't do everything, and you certainly can't do everything extremely well. It's really a question of identifying where you can put your efforts to best effect, and where you can make the best use of the staff that you have, where you can grow them into positions of responsibility so they end up working on the various areas and taking responsibility for those. So I sometimes give the analogy of a captain of a ship. You may have become the captain of a ship because you're extremely good at navigating or really good at stoking the engines in the old days, but just purely because you're good at those things, because you are competent, doesn't mean to say you should continue to do those. So being the captain of the ship means staying on the bridge and making sure everybody else is taking responsibility for their particular areas, and making sure you know how to get the right information from those areas to make the right business decisions. And the more you can do that, and I've seen you do this, the less busy you become, but the more effective you become, because you're making a greater contribution through your support and investment in staff and systems and processes to get the various results. But that busyness might manifest itself and be explained by people in terms of, I've got too much work on, I've got more sales than I need, or I haven't got enough sales, I've got to work harder at business development, or we've got all this work to do, I need to get down and help the team. There are many, many reasons why people say they haven't got time. But the reality is everybody's got the time. It's a question of how you best spend it. And that's where taking a step back, and you are definitely an integral part of that book. It's about taking a step back and thinking about how can I get the best out of myself and my business without working in it. How can I spend more time working on it? So
yeah, and I remember that being one of the hardest things to learn, and it really did take a long time because you keep finding yourself going back in the weeds. I think you refer to it as jumping back in the weeds. There's a great image in this book which is where the guy's got the square wheels and he's trying to tow something along.
Yes.
And there's a bloke behind him saying, I want to show you this invention, and it was a rolly wheel instead of a square wheel. And he goes, I can't talk to you, I don't have enough time.
That's right.
It was obvious why. But and I remember when I was working with you at the very start where you explained the different functions of the business: sales, marketing, human resources, and financial control.
Right. And
that was enlightening to me, because what happened with me is I learnt my trade as an electrician, okay, and then after being an electrician, I think I did like a 3 months course at TAFE just to learn how to sort of have financial control over a business, cash flow statements and things like that, but it was a very short course.
Right.
And then from there I wanted to become a builder, so I worked for my father as a supervisor. And then from there I learned how to be an estimator. Of course, if I go back a few steps, I learned how to swing a hammer. When I worked with Dad, I was 12 years old and I'm putting frames together, and I used to complain to him that I was only 12, but because he used to work me like a dog. But and I couldn't tried to keep up, but it was hard. But and then so you learn how to do all of this stuff, right? But no one teaches you how to run a business.
Right.
Mum and Dad, started off in a caravan, and I think Dad left school in Year 10, Form 4, and Mum left a little bit earlier than that, and they just worked stuff out and just taught themselves, and as most small businesses in Australia do. So no one teaches you unless you go and do a 4-year university degree or whatever, which just doesn't happen. No one teaches you how to run a business.
That's right.
And I think what happened with me was I had so much desire and passion and ambition. You want to take on the world, and you really grow your business to a point where you're not in control, because you haven't been taught sort of the fundamentals. And so you sort of wake up one day and you have a team of people, and you've got to get down and get your hands dirty, and I'll just take over and do that. You can't do it right, so I'll just take over. When I first met you and you explained, the functions of the business and having good organisational structure and the importance of that. So why don't you elaborate on that? Once I established my organisational structure and the roles and responsibilities, it just started to make a huge difference in my business.
It's a really good place to start. And actually you talked about, people don't start business because they're good at businesses. They start it because they are passionate about something, which is really why I started my business, is because I'm passionate about seeing businesses such as yours succeed. And what I found was, when I first started working with businesses, there was a lack of clarity about who was responsible for what in organisations. So the result of that was you'd find two people doing the same thing, or certain functions, especially difficult or tedious ones, not getting done at all because there's no clarity about who actually owns that function. And so I built what I call an organisational architecture, which is, for me, essential to any kind of growth and scalability. So I used to hear people say things like, the business failed because it grew too quickly. Well, why would a business grow too quickly if there's so much money coming in? Well, one of the reasons for that is it's not a clear view about how the business should grow. So if it's growing in terms of the operations work that it's doing, you need more people in there, but somebody still needs to manage that, or it's actually needs to handle the sales opportunities. You may need more people in that sales team, but you still have a sales manager responsible for that function. So it really is important that when doesn't matter how big or small your business is, if it's a one-man band, you still have to do all those functions, but you just have to set specific time aside to do those. If you're a massive multinational, you still need those functions, only now you've got teams of people to do those. And that's all very well to put an org chart together that shows who reports to who, but it's actually a bit more subtle than that. It's really about who sets whose priorities. If everybody's priorities in the business are aligned, the business will succeed. Where problems often occur is where the leader's responsibilities or objectives are misaligned with the people in their team, and they're pulling them in different directions. So having that structure well defined and communicated is critical. And then the next question obviously is, okay, well, I know who's in my team, I know who I report to, I know who's responsible for different functions. Well, what does that actually mean? And that's where something as simple as a position description really helps everybody understand this is the boundary of my responsibility. And then it starts to build on itself. Okay, we've defined the responsibility boundary. Now how do I measure performance? Well, this is what the business is trying to achieve. These are the responsibilities. Now we can work out what people have got to do in their respective areas to ensure that the business objectives are actually met. And what I love about the way you've worked in your business is the way you've taken that and actually applied it in a way that actually works in your business. So people know what they're doing in your organisation. They know what they're responsible for. Provides focus, provides responsibility, and it also provides job satisfaction, because now they're not just doing what you tell them to do, they're taking responsibility and ownership for their respective areas, which is a radically different approach to take.
The moment that I started applying, that logic, like giving someone a list of their responsibilities to say, all right, this is what I want you to do in my business. I want you to send the orders out to the suppliers. I want you to process all the building permits, and outlining exactly who's responsible for what. So what happened with us was our supervisors were really struggling on site, and there was a lot of work that they had to push through, and they needed support from the office, and they kept bringing up Feng, and I said to Feng and the whole team, we need to support our supervisors. They've got a lot of work at the moment. Things are going wrong. We need to help them. And Feng come into my office one day and he said, Trav, the supervisors keep ringing me, and he was a bit flustered. And I said, Feng, exactly like this. I said, Feng, can you please just help them? They need help. And he walked off. And I thought to myself, hang on a minute. He's come into my office. He needs me, and I need to support him here. So I said, Feng, come back in here. And I said, tell me exactly what the issue is. And he goes, the supervisors keep calling me and I don't think it's my job to do what they're asking me to do.
Right.
And I said, okay, well, what are they calling you for? And I wrote not a big list, it was like a list of 5 or 6 different things that they were calling the office for. And I looked at those things, what they needed, and I wrote down next to each and every one of them who was responsible for that.
Yeah.
My name was against one question that they might have, Shona's name was against another one, and so on and so forth. So then I was able to educate the supervisors as to who's responsible for what in our office, because we actually are organised. We've got a position description. Yeah. Everyone's responsible for their part in the team.
Yeah.
But I just needed to educate my supervisors to let them know. But that just made a huge difference, because in principle, if we're asking the right team members, those questions that we need support on, we're not asking someone else whose job it isn't to do that, because it's the guys get frustrated if they've got to do things that are outside their responsibilities.
Yeah.
And it had a big impact on us going forward as a team, just to let everybody know who's doing what.
Yeah. That's a really good example, because if you hadn't addressed that situation and it had continued, all those issues the supervisors were raising, legitimate issues, but they then continue to involve Feng, who's distracted from doing his estimation work, and he's dealing with things he doesn't need to be doing, and then it distracts you as well. I would guess, based on what you just said, the amount of issues that you and Feng deal with now from the supervisors is way less, because they've worked out, okay, I'm clear, this is something I have to deal with myself, or directly with Shona, or with a supplier, or something of that order. And that approach you're taking there is how you get efficiency in the business, because you start to see it, the amount of issues that you see starts to drop, because people in your team have stepped up to dealing with those issues, as opposed to just passing them through to you.
Yeah, which is what happens as well.
Right.
Yeah, because it's not going through the right channels.
Right.
And it's really, once you crack that nut, you go from being extremely unorganised to very organised.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that we're perfect, because we've still got a long way of being organised. We've still got a few processes that need to be written up, and we're, Shona's great for me, because she's always saying to me, Trav, is that my responsibility to do this? And it's like, oh, great. I get excited, because it's like, well, that's another thing that we haven't defined.
Right.
So let's define it now.
Yeah.
Yes, it is, or no, it isn't.
Yeah.
It's this person's.
Yeah.
And you just know that you're chipping away at just being a little bit more sort of organised.
100%. As you know, I love quotes, and I find that usually just a simple statement is really can often tell 1,000 words.
Yeah.
And the one that comes to mind when I hear you say that is, don't let perfect be the enemy of better. We don't yet have perfect processes. We don't yet have perfect position descriptions, but you can develop that. You can build it. So if it's typically use the 80-20 principle, get an 80% result with 20% of the effort, and then you can continue to evolve it and make it better and better as you find a need to. Sometimes I find that businesses get stuck because it's just all too hard. It's too difficult to write position descriptions. But your position descriptions, as mine, 2 pages. It doesn't need to be any more than that to clarify the bounds of responsibility. And if you miss something, you can add it in. You'll soon find out. Yeah. But the 80-20 approach, I think, is really, really key to successful business.
And then the other thing is, it's really challenging when you've got staff members that have worked for you for 5 years.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden you're going to try and clearly define their role and responsibility, which means you're changing, you might be changing things for their world. And then that's really hard to manage as well. And also, you've got to reinforce. Like, once you provide them with their responsibilities, you got to reinforce that that's their responsibility sometimes too, which is hard to get used to, because you think if you tell someone something once, then that's it, they should just do it that way, but it just doesn't work like that. And I think you've got to learn to show a lot of patience and Yeah.
And how did you make that happen? Because often people have worked for years without a position description. The first reaction may well be, why do I need this? I can do what I do perfectly well. So you may well have had some resistance.
Yeah.
How did you deal with that?
Well, I called you up and you come in my office and we did a session on ADCAR. Remember?
We did.
ADCAR. So, and I just constantly go back to that. Well, yeah, so why don't you talk about
so,
ADCAR?
Yeah, okay, so ADCAR is an acronym. It's part of the ProSci change management methodology, and it stands for awareness, so making people aware of why the change is necessary. So people need to understand this is what it's for, this is the reason why we have to make the change, to improve this, to fix that, or whatever the reason is. And they need to have an opportunity to discuss and ask questions about that. The D part of ADCAR is desire, so that you want people not just to be aware of the change, but you actually want them to be proponents of it. You actually want them to not just support you in it, but actually want to help make the change as well. So it really is fundamentally about answering the question, what's in it for them? Why would they bother changing their way of doing things? So, for example, when you're putting out a new position description, they say, well, I don't need it, why would I need that? Well, it's a good idea for us to be aligned collectively on what we agree those responsibilities are, because sometimes there are differences of opinion, and when you write it down, it makes it very unambiguous. So getting people to explaining why it's in their interest to do that, and now we can allow them to take real ownership and responsibility for it, rather than wondering, is this something I should ask Trav for permission for, or do I make the decision in this space myself? K is about knowledge. It's about giving people the tools and capabilities to be able to take on whatever it is that might be new to their role that they may not have the skills for previously. So it might involve training, it might involve direct support or mentoring, or sending them on courses. And very often when companies need to make a change in their organisation, that's the first place they go, we've got to make this change, we've got a brand new accounting system, let's get everybody trained. So they send everybody on the training for the accounting system and wonder why nobody comes back and wants to use it, because they haven't taken the time to do the awareness and the desire part as well. The other A in ADCAR is for ability, and my analogy here is if you didn't know how to drive and I gave you the knowledge and the training to drive, you sure as hell wouldn't stick somebody in the car and just put them out the road for the first time on their own. They may have the knowledge, but they don't necessarily have the ability. So the comment you made earlier about supporting people through that change and reinforcing it is really, really important, because you want to make sure that people do have the skills to be able to apply the knowledge they've acquired. And very often they may get it wrong first time. That's okay, provided that they've got the help and support to understand where it didn't go quite right. And then lastly, the R is exactly what you just talked about, the reinforcement. It's a bit like an elastic band. You pull an elastic band out, and the natural tendency is to pull it back into where it was. Why? Because people are comfortable with doing what they used to do. Now we've introduced a new way. They need to get comfortable with the new way, and that takes time. It's never overnight. It's going to take a bit of time. So again, the management help and support in that space is really, really important. So I'm rapt that you remembered the acronym, because just being able to recall that and apply it for even those little changes is a really powerful technique to make sure it sticks and works.
Yeah, because I use it all the time, because when you start working with you really do start to realise how far away you are from having the company set up the way that you really want it to be set up. I remember talking to you in the first few sessions and realising the scope that I needed to undertake. I could see all the holes in my business, and I had a vision. I knew straight away what the vision was and what areas of the business I needed to work on, but it was the scope was quite sort of large. And so that undertaking, so for example, we started off by looking at the functions of the business,
right,
and then the organisational structure, the responsibilities of each of the people that work for you. From there we looked at what their objectives are, so that we can measure against that and against our goals. Then that starts to uncover all the problems that are in the business.
Right.
So then you need to bring in potentially new systems.
Yes.
and you've got people that have worked with you for 5 years thinking, why do I have to change what I've been doing? I know what I'm doing, but I don't have these tools in place, then I can't really manage the business properly. The ad car has been extremely helpful.
It's great
for my business.
I think you touched on a really, really important point, because it can look really daunting when you first start to look deep into your business and see the areas that you know you can and should improve. It can seem quite overwhelming for some businesses. Yours wasn't so bad, that you had quite a bit that was good in there that we could leverage, but there were areas, as you've indicated, that we could do more with. And I think for that reason, one of the things that I've been really, really focused on ever since I've had the business is that awareness and understanding that you have a lot to do. In your role as CEO and business owner, you have a lot to do. It's no good me giving you tools and techniques that are going to take hours to implement or tedious to maintain, because no matter how good they are, it simply won't happen. So one of the things that has always been important to me is that you've got things that are simple and easy to use and apply, and that's one of the key reasons I wrote the book. Is I want to get these things in there so people can see it actually isn't that difficult. It requires dedication, yes. It does require a discipline, yes. But if you apply those things, you'll start to reap the benefits, and then it builds on itself as you do more of that, and more people in the business are taking responsibility for their respective areas. So you get a bit more time. You're not getting interrupted so much. There's more time to think about the business, because the best thing you bring to the business is this.
Well, I know. And when we're going over the position descriptions, and remember I asked you for this CEO position description.
Yes.
And I read it, and I thought, I'm not doing a single one of those things. Like, I just wasn't.
Right.
I just wasn't. And, well, it all depends. I think like what you said before, you've got to dedicate the time to manage those different functions of the business. So check in on sales, for example, how they're going, ... But, it depends on sort of how big your business is. But you really have to get into that CEO role, don't you, if you've got a pretty sizable business where you've got a few people working for you. If you've got 5, 6, 7 or 8 people working for you, you need to prioritise the CEO role.
Absolutely.
As opposed to being as just one part of the function of that business. Because that's where you get caught, that's where you catch yourself out by spending all that time in your business instead of doing what the really important stuff is, which
100%.
is working on your business.
100%. And I'm glad you raised that, because I've yet to find a single business that has written a position description for a CEO or managing director. It just typically doesn't exist. And when you have that enlightening discussion, well, what is your role exactly? Often the first thing that's talked about is some element of the key product or service that the business is there to do. But that's not actually the biggest thing that the CEO brings to the business, because with enough training and support, anybody else could do the things the business does, make the things the business makes. It's not the CEO that does that. The CEO's role is far broader than that, and it's about achieving the balance in the business, so that it's a balance between task and team, getting stuff done but supporting the team. It's a balance between sales and operations, so we're not getting too much business coming in and the operations team can't handle it, or we've got a big team there sitting on their hands waiting for work to come through. So that's why the CEO's role is so important. It's maintaining balance throughout, including balance with family life as well. Because it's go back to your original question about time management, or the question, what's the most common issue I see? It's time management. And one of the things that happens when that isn't under control, the CEOs or the business owners, family life, their personal time, that tends to get sacrificed and hit. They miss the birthdays, they miss the holidays. Sometimes they go without pay to make sure that their staff or their customers are served first of all. That never seemed right to me, and so what I wanted to do with that book was help redress the balance, allow the CEOs to get what they deserve, because they're taking the risk. They're the ones that are managing all the risk in the business. They're the ones that at the end of the day, bottom line stops with them. So they deserve to have all the help and support they can get. But it's interesting, if you go to a business and find out, does the CEO have a position description? They typically don't. When we talked about that, it was an eye-opener, I think, which, you've really grasped, and you've focused it on those core areas. And as you've done that, the other areas that you used to spend more time in have started to be able to take care of themselves, because back to the PDs, people understand what their role is in that business. Yeah.
I believe I haven't even mastered it yet, but I know what I want to achieve. I know what I want to be ultimately doing.
Well, that's the great thing about that role, and same as what I do, you never stop learning.
Yeah.
I learn things from every single client I work with, yourself included. That's why you are in that book. It's the insights that you see business owners get, and some of the things that they're doing of their own volition or with support. They go, that's a damn good idea. That could be utilised elsewhere. So it's good to assemble that.
I'm glad I'm in the book, by the way. Look, I said to the kids, look, I'm in the book.
Quote it.
I'm actually in the book.